Hello, Ben here with Studio on the Lake. Hey, this is the first ever watercolor painting, the first painting I've ever filmed to show you guys, and it's around Christmas time. I'm like, so that's what we're going to end up with in the end here, and I'm going to number these. So this will be number 1 in the watercolor, and then I'll do as many, and I think I might go back and do the same thing with the wood stuff. So what do you need? This is beginner, basic, and I'll do a couple more with more in-depth stuff in there, and as we go through, just to supplement, because Studio on the Lake is an art studio, and I'll start adding stuff to that I do. So I got 2 glasses there. Those are actually German mustard glasses, and we've got tons of them. You wash them out, and then brushes, and these are cheap brushes, not necessarily cheap, between $5 and $10 a piece, and they're for watercolor. And I use the same brushes for watercolor and for acrylic. So you got your 3 painting mediums: watercolor, acrylic, and oil. The oil brushes are something completely different. And is this expensive? Yes, it is. You can't get away with using a kid's watercolor set because there's just not enough pigment in there. You have to buy paints that have pigment in them. They make 3 grades of watercolor. You can see my kit there that I keep just for the watercolor, and I keep that separately from the acrylic, separately from the oil. And here's the ones that we're going to put in there today. And I basically just put in there for a palette colors of the rainbow: Roy G. Biv, ROYGBIV, red, orange, yellow, blue, green, indigo, and violet. And so that's the way you learn the colors of the right there. In that are the primary colors: red, yellow, and green. I'm sorry, I lied. Red, yellow, and blue. So with red, yellow, blue, you can mix pretty much any color, but they start to get convoluted. And these have different things in there. Now, there are 3 grades of watercolor paints, basically. There are student grades, they call them, and they're relatively cheap, being $4 to $5 a tube. A little tube goes a long way, and I'll show you that in a minute. And then you've got your intermediate grades, which are, they call them artist grade. And then you've got your professional artist grade. The professional have more pigment in them, and they're produced a little higher. Of course, you're going to pay $7 to $15 a tube, same size of tube, the small tube, and I'm not sitting near them, or I'd show you, give you the ounces on there. So what do you need? You need brushes, something to put water in. That's a mat board in the background. It's just a piece of cardboard that I tape the watercolor paper to, and you'll need a palette. Now, so it looks kind of like the little kid palettes that you used to get, and you get your watercolors in and get them all muddied up. But this thing was $4. I got it from the art store across the street. You've got all of them. All 3 of the major art stores, I won't name them, have those. But here's the palette that I've had set up, and I think that's my landscape palette. I have 2 different palettes I basically use. One's my goof-off palette, and then this is my general palette. And after a while, you end up washing all the colors out of there and starting over again. But I'm not going to use those. I'm going to build a palette just for these Christmas cards. And like Jordy Johnson, Christmas is a little early, but if you're going to sell Christmas cards and the gallery wants a bunch of Christmas cards, I've got probably 30 or 40 of them done. And I'll show you in a second video here that I'm probably going to shoot tomorrow how I do 8 cards at a time, because they're the same theme, or 4 and 4, but I'll show you that. So to rejuvenate these, they dry, they get hard, and that's the beauty of this. It's probably the cleanest of all the painting. Oil painting's a mess. Acrylics can be a mess, but this watercolor stuff, you just let them dry in the palette. Close that palette up. You can take it with you wherever you go, or put it in the corner. And then I use that spray bottle. It says Windex on there, but it's actually just got water in it. So we'll start putting paints in and building the palette up. So red, Roy G. Biv. So I'm gonna speed this up. There's no reason for you to watch me put these in there. I'm not going to name the exact color in this one. In the future, I'll start delineating different colors and different palettes. in there. But let's just say, for the sake of beginner, we're doing red, and I've got a couple shades of red, orange, and this orange was a cadmium orange. If it has cadmium in it, it's going to be expensive. This one was 12 for the little tube. Yellow, and a couple of these I've got different shades, and that's green. It's a darker green. There's a middling. There's blue. And I'm going to have 2 or 3 shades of blue in there. And I won't give those to you either. I've got Prussian blue, cobalt blue, etc. And in the future I will, like I said, name those paints. But we're just going to set up a quick palette here. It's not going to take very long. Now I've got the greens. And I wanted to separate those in the corner. You can set up your palette any way you want. There are art teachers out there that'll have you set it up a certain way. And you can stick with that if you want, or you can develop your own. I kind of stick with the same thing. I know what colors are in there, and I very rarely mess them up. Like I might have 2 different shades of green, but I can tell. Now with these watercolors, they are pretty dark, and you just use a little bit of it and dilute it with water, hence the word watercolor. This one was kind of interesting. I'm going to put it off by itself. I picked this one up because it said green gold and the color on there. I didn't end up using it, but I was thinking for Christmas stuff, a little gold thing. Now that one that I put right in there is not a watercolor paint. That's a gouache, and that's kind of it's a bastardized version. It's a cross between acrylic and watercolor, but I use that over white, and that's blasphemous in the watercolor world. Purists don't use white. So here's the paper I use. I was trying to show you that I'm using for this, and then tomorrow's or the next days will be Christmas cards. But this is 140 weight. At some point we'll talk about watercolor papers. There's certain ones I do like to use and other ones I don't. And then I'm going to tape this down to the board. If you don't, it'll warp a little bit with the water, and you won't like the result. You can't paint it rough unless you're using a really thick bond. Here's a trick that I learned. This tape will tear the edge of the paper if you're not careful. If you get it wet, or if it's a particularly strong tape, when you go to pull this off, it will peel up little sections of the corner of your paper. Not necessarily ruin your painting, but make it look worse. You'll have to put matting on it. So you can do this on I use it on my jeans on occasion. I'll put the tape on my jeans. I'll put it on a wool shirt. In this case, I've got kind of a grungy board on the side, so I stick the tape to the board first, which takes a lot of the stickiness out of it. There's a really good tip for you before I stick it down, and then it has a lesser chance of tearing the paper. Now you can get tape if you're doing really fancy pieces that you've worked out and you're finally getting down to where you're painting the last one. You can get archival tape to put on the edge that's acid-free and the whole 9 yards. And that will help you get a final finished product. But in this case, I just taped it down, and now I'm wetting down a little bit of the red, and this is going to be a Christmas gnome. It is too early for Christmas, but if you're going to sell Christmas items, you have to get them ahead of time, because people don't want to buy Christmas items after Christmas or any other time. This being the first time that I tried filming this way, I can think of a better way to do it. I might end up making a camera bracket that goes directly over top of the paper, but in this case I'm shooting slightly off to the left and at wonky angles, and occasionally I get my old gray hair stuck in the middle of it. So this is the gnome's hat. This is kind of a fictional cartoon gnome, and he's going to be in a Christmas style. He's not going to have eyes and very few details, so it's really straightforward. And this is just a case. If you're going to build one like this, they're really fun to do. People like them. They sell real well in a card format. This is not a card. This is like a 5x7 piece. And I'm doing it without wetting the paper. You can actually wet all of the watercolor paper down, let it dry by spraying it or brushing it, and then your watercolors will work from the top all the way down, and that's a technique. At some point, if we get too far enough in this series, I'll show you how I do that. But here, all I'm doing is basically painting this on dry. Now my paint is off to the left, and when you see me go to the right, my water glass is to the right. So paint left, water right, and you can see I reached to the right and pulled some water, and now I have really very little paint on the brush. I'm just messing around with water, and I'm kind of moving that paint around, that pigment around. Now if you were to put another color in this, it would run into the other run and make a unique pattern. That's kind of what makes watercolor fun. You can really make a muddy mess of it, or you can make a clean strike. So the left side's paint, right side is water. Now, something that's not apparent right now, but will be apparent later on, you can also leave little white open patches in that. And if you're smart and you mask off a certain part, or you stay away from a part and you leave the white showing through. Watercolor purists don't like to use any other thing on there, like the gouache. They hate that. They think you should be able to leave the white pieces in the paper there as a negative space, and then they show through. And there's a couple ways to do that. You can paint carefully around it in a dry format, which is kind of what I'm doing there. You see, I put on that paint, and now I went for water, and I'm just going to take that and stretch that down into the hat. Anywhere that water runs on this paper, and different papers, different styles of papers, there's tons of them, act and react differently with the pigment on the paint. This is just a straight grade 140 bond. With a kind of a rough surface on there. It's cold press. There's hot press, cold press, etc., and we'll go into that if we get far enough into the series. So if you guys like the watercolor part of this, let me know. I'm going to run probably 10 or 15 of them over the next 6 months, and we'll see how they come out. So one of the things in art we don't have to worry about in carving is light. In this case, in the back of my head, I'm not paying a whole lot of attention to this. I'm not a professionally trained artist. I've taken a few art classes, and mostly they annoyed me. The teachers grabbing crap out of your hand and messing up your drawing. But I did learn a lot. I've got two of my kids, my oldest son and oldest daughter. My daughter has a master's in art and does beautiful, fantastic stuff. And my son has a degree in art from Ringling College of Art and School Design down in Sarasota, Florida. And he's an excellent artist, and he actually knows what he's talking about. They spent several years learning from people that know what they're doing, and I'm just faking it. So I got the hat, and you'll notice the light coming from the left side. So the left side of the hat is a little bit lighter than the right side of the hat, and I'm just going to start working some basic art principles into these as we go along. And that is not in carving. In carving, that's done with the planes. Now you notice I left a little white on the tip of his nose there. And then up under his hat, obviously his nose is sticking out from the edge of his hat, so it would be a little bit darker because that would be up in there. And not that this is fine art by any means, and again, I'm not the guy. I can get you started, but then you'll have to refine it by going to somebody who really knows what the hell they're doing. So there's my gray hair sticking in there. Here's a problematic thing. The beard, your beard would typically, in an elf or something like this, a Santa concept, would be white or a light gray. Most white-haired people is actually gray hair. But in this case, I'm using blue, and I'm using it very lightly. So in order to make this look right, you'd have to fill in the negative space behind the beard. In other words, the left and the right-hand side would have to be colored in, all that white, and then leave the white of the beard sticking out. So I've cheated, and I've kind of went with something, a cool color, which would be the light blue. And you'll see what I do with that in a minute. I'm painting kind of hairs in, very similar pattern that I would do if I were to carve. Although this beard is straight with very few curves and such on it. And if you stick around to the end of this, you're going to see a couple of gnomes. I've been carving gnomes to go down south. And hey, Mike, I apologize. I promised I was going to get onto the raven. I did do some of the raven. but I haven't edited that, and I don't have enough of it to edit in. So here's what I did. I put the little lines in there, and now I'm going back over it with just a water wash, and you can see how it's kind of blending in, yet leaving little shadows behind on the beard. So it's kind of neat. And I'm trying to stay, you see the little white lines between the hat and the white lines between the nose and the beard? I'm staying away from that because those colors will bleed in, and there's a point here where I put the mittens on where it starts to bleed in. Now you could get some pretty cool effects in here with this watercolor. You see I'm adding another wash on top, and it's wet. This is wet on wet. I could put a drop of red or purple in there, and it would bleed down in and give those cool watercolor effects, and we'll do some of that in the future ones, but in this case I'm sticking with one pigment, one color, and I'm staying kind of with the theme. A little darker on the right side, a little lighter on the left. That just gives it a contrast. Makes it, it takes it away from, into the kind of, in my brain, to the art world, where light and shadows start to play on it, as opposed to a crayon where you just color one solid color. Now here's some interesting stuff going to happen here once you get away from my fuzzy gray hair. You'll notice I had the wet in there. Look at what's happened to that arm. That green is starting to fade into that blue, and I didn't want it to do that. So here's how you fix that. Grab a paper towel, dry that off. Notice I dried the right hand side off too, because that would have bled in there also. And then I'll show you in a little bit here how I come back and I fixed that. I ran most of the rest of this at 2 times the speed because it's the proverbial paint dry kind of concept. So made up character, just kind of making a little Christmas gnome looking Joker, and we went back to the red, and you can see I left a thumb on the mitten there. And a lot of the Christmas cards, this is as far as I'll take it. I won't put a body in there. I'll just leave it kind of pigs in space. But in this case, we're going to go ahead and go down to the tape. Now, you'll see later on where this tape will actually work as kind of a mask that will leave a border of maybe 1/4 of an inch that I left under the tape. Will not get paint on it, and that paint will stay away from what I do in the middle here to finish the card out. Gives it kind of a neat looking border and gives it a professional look. So we're just kind of going with a robe perhaps under contrasting colors. Christmas, obviously blue or greens and reds, and there you go. There's where the shadow would have been underneath the ball on the tip of that, and I'll come back and do a little bit more of that later on. So now that dried a little bit. You see I just put in where I erased that over in the left hand there. And now I'm putting beard hairs back in, and I'm going to leave these proud. And I just fixed the right hand side there. Right side is a water, left side is paint. So now I'm going more paint and less water. And I want this blue and the pigment and the beard hairs to be a little bit more pronounced. There's one spot in the middle there you saw me just put on there that was a little thick with the brush, but that doesn't hurt anything. It just gives it that handmade look. And these are sold as handmade Christmas cards, and people like them because they're unique, and they're really kind of fun to do up until the point where you're doing 50 of them. So imagine doing 50 of this guy, and he will sell for between $5 and $8 depending upon what you per card, depending on what you do. So if you think about it, when you got a lot of money in it. And so I'm now back to the gouache, and this is a brand new brush, and I don't like it yet. It's holding together way too well. It's giving me kind of a sharp edge as opposed to a round, because this we're supposed to be line dot line dot line dot, and I kind of got it in there, but it didn't do the magic. Then I'm putting little bitty stars. You'll see this if you make it to the end, or if you skip to the end to see what's going on. You'll see some of the carved gnomes. I put I paint the same pattern in the hat on the gnomes because it finishes the product off, and it just seems to work like a knitted cap that somebody had put together. So again, I'm trying to do line, dot, and I need to work on the filming just a tad with this. I'm shooting this from pretty far away, probably 5 feet, and then zooming in. And I will get the painting portion set up so that I get a little better filming on it, and you'll get that. But you can see I'm just putting dots in. This is where I got sick of that brush. It wasn't doing what I wanted to do. I went to my older brush, which now will make a perfect dot. That other one was making more of a hash mark on there. And this will fade a little bit. What you can do with this is the gouache is or gouache is go over it a second time, or you can run it really thick. I'm running kind of thin here. I will put a little thicker coat on the fur that's going to go around the edge of his cap, as if he had white fur or cotton or fuzz, just to delineate that out. These are really simple to make. You can make any shape that you come up with on these gnomes. Seems to work fairly well. I prefer some of them better than others, but this is a really easy thing to paint. Doesn't take any artistic talent, because I really don't have any. Give these a try. Watercolor is really fun to mess around with. It takes a lot to master it, and I'm so far away from. I can get a lot of the effects that I want, but I have to think about it, and it's a nice relaxing thing that I'll do a lot of times in the winter if I don't feel like going outside. Obviously, it can't stay out in a cold studio because it freezes, but I can sit inside the house where it's warm. And a lot of times I'll go all the way up the hat. In this guy's case, I won't, for your sake, and you can see it's just simple dots and lines, and you can come up with any kind of knitted pattern. Do a Google search if you're interested. You see I'm tempted to put some more stuff in the top, and I didn't. Fighting the urge, and then I decided that this needed a highlight right there where the light would have hit that, and I liked the highlight I left in his nose, but he needed a touch more. So there's the guy basically painted. That's kind of boring to me anyway, especially in a card. So now I'm going to take yellow, red, and blue and do little stars all kind of over there, finish the card out. And then I'm going to show you another trick here in a minute to really finish this off. So you see I skipped ahead. I put in green, yellow, and red. And I think there's some blue in there. I'd have to look again. But I'm just randomly putting little stars, for lack of a better, 3 lines intersecting for 6 points. And it was easier to come around rather than stick my hand in what might be wet. If you stick your hand in there, it will smear. And it can be fixed, but it's not worth it in a lot of cases. So when this is all done, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come back with a yellow. I'm going to add a little bit of yellow. And I'm going to put a yellow dot right in the middle of each of those, which gives it a little bit of a luminescent. It doesn't necessarily show up well on this. Like I said, I've got to get my filming better. And I am doing this down in Iowa. And I don't have my lights set up. I do have filming lights that I use out in the studio, or in the Stuga in this case, lately here, since the studio fire. But I could film and get a little bit more light in there, but those show off as luminescent star points in the middle of these, and that just kind of finishes out the drawing. Keep in mind that these are only going to sell between $5 and $10, depending on the detail in them, and they're a card with an envelope inside of a plastic deal. When you add up the paint and the time it takes to do these, if you're going to sell cards, you need to do them fairly fast. Now, here's the trick to really professional them up and kind of make them cool on the end, and in some cases hide mistakes. So I've got the gouache over there, and then I've got some blue, and I'm mixing up a very thin light blue color. So I've got a heavy brush, and I'm going to use this, and now I'm going to flick little snow dusts on there. Initially they started off kind of fat, but I can live with that. And I'm going to put some blue in there, and then I'm going to come back and do some white. So here's the white, and you can see it's giving him a snowy, like he's standing out in the snow. And it just makes a pretty cool look. And it's really hard to keep from overdoing this. And some people will think that this part was ruined, that you ruined it when you did this, but I just like it's kind of a cartoony thing. And it's a Christmas card, so Christmas cards should have snow. Obviously, snow has a light blue tint to it. If you want to make whiter, put a little bit of blue to it. And now I'm pulling the tape. You can see I'm pulling the tape kind of at a 45. Since I did stick that masking tape down to the edge of the board and take a little of the stickiness out of it, I didn't get any tear-outs in this. And tear-outs, the little cotton fibers will tear up with the tape. And if you're really careful, and you dull that tape down like I did, I showed you on the edge of the board, but I'll do it on my jeans or I'll do it on a wool shirt, and it takes a lot of the stickiness out of it and it won't tear. It gives it an opportunity to break. So there's a whole layout. Water on the side, da-da-da-da. This cleans up fairly rapidly. You can put it, just close those lids up on those things, the paint, and stick it off in the corner. It folds up into a nice little area. They do a lot of plein air painting with this stuff. So there he is, a gnome Christmas card, and now you know how to do it. And the paint is not cheap. You can see in the lower right hand corner I did sign it, BAM, with my standard signature. But that's what a Christmas gnome card will look like, and I've been carving these and painting these because they seem to sell really well, and I got to crank them out. Somebody's got to make money somehow. So coming up in a minute, that's going to be the end of it. Here is some of the gnomes that I've been cranking out. There'll be about 15 or 20 of those sent down to the studio. You can see I take scraps of wood, and I will have a video on carving these. You've seen that bigger style before. I did a video on it, but I haven't done the little short ones. They're quick, they're painless. I did 15 or 20 wands that are going down there, and they seem to be selling really well. Harry Potter wands, and then wands of my own design. This is one of my own design, and it turned out to be an inch longer than the others, and I had to build a special box for that bigger. So check the boxes out. This is my own design. I really like this one. And I got videos coming out on these guys too, as well as, hey Mike, I do owe you that. I will get back to the birds as soon as we get all this Christmas profit crap. There's a box, and there's a video on how to make those boxes. So if you haven't subscribed to Studio on the Lake, by all means do so. You'll get to see all of these, and you'll see the watercolors will be done in number 1, number 2, number 3, that sort of thing. At some point, I will also add pottery to that, plates and cups and stuff, and it'll be a true studio, art studio. At some point, I'll show you some of the welding and various different things that I'm doing and some of the woodworking. So here's a quick preview of some of the cards that are going down there. These are the Christmas cards, and you can see that is an actual Christmas card that will get its own envelope. It opens up, and you can get goofy with them if you want. You can change them up for boredom, but tomorrow I will film how I do a lot of these and show you some snowmen on how they go. So as always, like, comment, subscribe. Different types of trees with using the effects of the watercolor, and these are Christmas cards. So, and then there's a couple of little larger ones. This is the same size of the one that I just showed you that was done last week. And this one had Christmas trees in the background, and there's some Christmas trees. You don't get a real good shot of those. Like I said, I got to get better on the camera work. But that's a watercolor Christmas tree card. And then this piece was ordered, and this is a landscaper that's done with the loon and the loon chicks in the background. That's already sold, going down the studio. So there's what I'm up to. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks a lot. This has been Ben with Studio on the Lake.